Hello everyone, my name is Chris Tawanu'u. I was born 2/22/2002. I am 21 years old and my pronouns are he, they.
That's the voice of a vibrant young Portlander who was recently homeless. Chris Tawanu'u grew up in foster care, and when they turned 18, they wanted to try living in a new city.
I ended up in Portland by hitching a ride with a bag full of clothes and left California.
There are so many young people like Chris, and in some ways, they're invisible. Young people living on their own without a family support system often face homelessness. And this is particularly true for young people of color and queer youth. But these might not be the people you think of when you think about people experiencing homelessness. The term homeless youth is actually hard to define.
It's not who you run into on the corner or outside a store or those sorts of things. So folks don't necessarily understand that there are youth out there that don't have a home. They've been kicked out of their home. They've been couch surfing. And there's youth that don't even have a guardian.
I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast about the place you call home. OPB reporter Tiffany Camhi recently looked into the many challenges facing unsheltered young people and the limited resources available to help them. Tiffany, one of the things that was so interesting about your reporting was just how difficult it is to even define who we're talking about when we talk about young people experiencing homelessness. Why is that?
Yeah, according to one federal measure, Oregon has the highest rate of unaccompanied, unsheltered youth in the nation. And that term means that there's no adult figure with them, like no parent or guardian, and they're living in a place that is considered unacceptable for people. And like you said, it's really hard to quantify because there are so many different definitions of youth homelessness from one government agency to another, and I'm talking about state definitions and federal definitions. Kendra Phillips-Neal works at Jackson Street Youth Services in Corvallis, and we heard her say earlier that couch surfing is just one example of what homelessness looks like for young people. But not every agency considers couch surfing homelessness.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then age ranges are different too. Sometimes it's people under 18, sometimes it's people under 25. And for my reporting, I really focused on young adults. So that's people between the ages of 18 to 25. And there are also some specific supports for kids who are enrolled in K through 12 schools. And those go away once they graduate or leave school.
Right.
But any way that you look at it, there are a lot of young people in need of housing and other resources in Oregon.
I mean, I imagine that what young people need is different from what older adults experiencing homelessness need, right?
Yes, exactly. A lot of the service providers that I talked to brought this up. Sean Sub works at New Avenues for Youth in Portland.
Part of what's different about a young person who is growing up that you can't just put in independent housing, that you're skipping a step.
And that's because they're still growing up and developing life skills and figuring out who they are. Just think of yourself when you turned 18.
Right.
I'm not sure if I would have been able to find housing and pay bills on my own without the help of my parents. So these are young people that they still really need a strong support system under them.
There's this idea that when you're 18, you're independent, you're an adult, you got it, right? Well, you don't have it at all. And especially if you have experienced homelessness or don't have a family that is willing to teach you how to be an adult, that can be an incredibly scary time.
We heard a little bit from Chris Tawanu'u already, and you spent some time with them last fall. Will you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yes, I'd love to. So Chris, I met them at this place called Pear last year in October. And Pear's kind of like a homeless youth drop-in center, but it's more of like a community space for young people experiencing homelessness. They can go there to get food. They have like a little library, like art supplies. They can just go there and hang out and be themselves. And I had my recorder and my headphones and the big microphone. So, I really stood out among everyone. Chris saw me and came right up to me. I think they were really attracted to the microphone. And they were just immediately a very dynamic person, so full of life, a natural entertainer. I started talking to Chris, and they told me that they grew up in foster care in California's Central Valley, but they were still close to their blood relatives or blood family, and they were Samoan and Tongan. And like I said, Chris was just super dynamic, always wanted to be the center of attention, and so willing to open up and talk about themselves.
I'm usually the therapist in my friend group. So I usually just bring them over here and just hammering life into their head. So yeah.
Hammer life into their head? Is that what you just said? What does that mean?
I'm just giving them life because I bring them a little razzle dazzle. Yeah.
I love that. Everyone needs someone like that in their life.
Period.
Do you have someone like that in your life?
Yeah, me.
So as you can hear, definitely brought that razzle dazzle.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned that they were a natural entertainer. Music was a big part of their life growing up. And they had a really, really beautiful singing voice. Their favorite style of music was R&B, loved Beyonce.
Yes.
I know everyone loves Beyonce. And they had an Instagram page with more than 10,000 followers, and that's where they posted all their music. They posted videos of them singing, and they even sang me their own version of a Destiny's Child song while I talked to them on the Portland waterfront.
Let me cater to you. Let me give my love, my will, my strength to you. Baby, that's the least I can do. Let me cater to you through the good, the bad, the ups and the downs, 'cause I still be here for you. Let me cater to you, yeah. Oh, no.
That was beautiful. So, Tiffany, you're talking about Chris in the past tense.
Yeah. A few weeks after I interviewed Chris, a few weeks after I had just met Chris, they died. And the exact circumstances aren't clear, but they were found dead in their studio apartment in downtown Portland last November. Law enforcement who were on scene found drug paraphernalia, suggesting a potential drug overdose.
God, Tiffany, that is so heartbreaking. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was shocking, but, sadly not that surprising because I had heard from a lot of homeless youth service providers that many young people who are or have been homeless are often dealing with substance abuse issues. And they also said young people are still dealing with the social isolation brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, of course, the emergence of illicit fentanyl in downtown Portland came around the same time. And I did talk to Chris a little bit about using drugs, and they said that they used, recreationally. They would sometimes use drugs with their friends. They would sometimes go and get drinks with their friends. But they said, it was nothing serious. They didn't have a problem with it. And they knew how dangerous fentanyl was because they knew people who had died from fentanyl overdoses. One of the service providers I talked to was Will Kendall. He runs a nonprofit serving homeless youth called Artist Mentorship Program, or AMP. Will got to know Chris really well. He was kind of like a mentor to Chris, and they would often play music together.
Chris was such a incredible human being, on so many levels. Their energy, the love that they had in their heart, the pain that they had in their heart. Chris was fearless. But I think that sadly came from, they had experienced the worst things that could possibly happen in many levels. You know, we're working with kids 15 to 25. They are physically changing. They're emotionally changing. For most of them, you know, drugs and alcohol play a role because it's helping to reduce the trauma, reduce the post-traumatic stress disorder, right? You know, if these kids were coming from traditional backgrounds and had the kind of trauma that they had, they would be in therapy. They would have antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications.
That's exactly right. That's such a good point. A lot of young people face trauma and mental health struggles, but not everyone has the same access to resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned earlier that queer and BIPOC youth are more likely to experience homelessness. Can you help us break down some of the reasons for that?
Yeah, so research has shown that youth experiencing homelessness are more likely to be Black, Indigenous, other people of color, also people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. And the reasons behind that are basically systemic racism and heterosexism. And I should also say people who interfaced with the foster care or juvenile justice system, they are much more likely to experience homelessness too.
Yep, that tracks. If you're more vulnerable in society overall, you're also more likely to experience homelessness. For young people who do want to get into a recovery program, what does that look like for them?
So just like with a lot of other services, what works for adults might not work for young people. And there are a few youth-specific and peer-led substance use recovery centers in Oregon. One of them is 4D, and that's in Portland. Tony Vesna is the executive director there.
Now, with kids, one of the most effective strategies is to have a positive peer group, okay? Where basically the young people have that social contract with each other. And so when people enter it, they enter these norms around not using anymore, right?
Okay, let's take a short break. And when we come back, we'll hear about another program set up to help young people who've experienced homelessness. So, Tiffany, we've been focused on addiction services, but obviously, young people experiencing homelessness are facing a slew of other problems. You did some reporting on a solution that's set up to help young people in a new way. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting solutions I've reported on is a pilot program here in Oregon called Direct Cash Transfers. It's a statewide anti-poverty program focused on young people in Oregon, and it's based on the concept of universal basic income. So the barrier to entry is really low. And young people who've experienced homelessness, they can receive cash payments of $1,000 a month for 2 years. And then they get to decide how to spend that money. There's no restrictions on it. They also get access to a one-time $3,000 payment, and they're calling that like an enrichment fund, and they can use that at any point during the 2-year period. The state partnered with a nationwide homeless youth nonprofit called Point Source Youth to bring this direct cash program to Oregon. And I spoke to Angela Huff at Point Source Youth.
What we decided to do is look at cutting out the middle person. So the cash now is taken directly from the funding source and given directly to the young people, and they're able to use it as they deem necessary.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Where does the funding for this come from? And also, how are the people who are part of this program using the money they've received?
Yeah, those are good questions. The money for the pilot comes from Oregon's general fund, and the cash payments to young people plus the administration costs add up to just over $4.4 million over 2 years. And I talked to some of the young people who are a part of this program about, what they were spending the money on. Dakota is 24 and lives in Central Oregon. They've used some of the money to buy a car. They also put some of it in savings. And they told me they're planning on going back to school to finish up a degree in computer information systems.
Most of this money has gone towards long-lasting, sustainable things for people like housing and vehicular transport. like paying off long-term debts, things that everybody would do if they got money handed to them, you know?
I also heard from Melissa Wands Munoz. They're 22 and grew up in and out of foster care for about 9 years in Portland. In 2019, they started couch surfing at friends' homes, but now they have their own apartment in Northeast Portland. And they're also part of the program. They put most of the money towards basic needs, like groceries. They were also able to buy some items that they needed for their apartment, like a bed frame and a table. And they also bought a phone for their 11-year-old sister, which I thought was really sweet.
Aww. I think this is a really big, huge beacon of hope. I don't know. I think that it's helped me believe more in my dreams of like making collective change and working with people to demand our needs getting met.
Yeah, that is really cool to hear about. So how is the state measuring success for this program?
Yeah, that's a little tricky to measure because it's still in the early stages, but initial state data shows nearly 2/3 of youth participants in the program have been housed since the pilot started a year ago. And I should say that some of these young people were already in the process of getting housing when the program started. And participants are encouraged, but not required. Again, nothing is required to take advantage of other resources offered by the service providers who distribute money. And that's things like financial literacy classes or like a renter's 101 class. I think it's called like a rent well class.
Oh, cool.
And according to the people running these pilots, a lot of them are taking advantage of those additional resources.
I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to direct cash transfer is that we have to do a lot of unpacking with our own biases and what makes us feel that we cannot trust the young people. And I think a lot of times it's because we think that young people are going to do what we did with our money. And the only difference is that we may have had a safety net, and these young people that we're looking to serve may not have that same safety net. So we want to make sure they have the autonomy to live the lives that they want to live. And this is just one step in that direction.
Well, that's great to hear about that success so far. I want to end by listening to a montage of voices you put together from your reporting. Can you tell us about these 3 young people we're about to hear from?
Yeah. So I spoke to 2 members of Oregon's Youth Advisory Board, and that's a board put together by the State Department of Human Services. It was created last year, and basically these young people are able to put their input on initiatives and services related to youth homelessness. I also spoke to another young person I met at a drop-in center in downtown Portland. All 3 have experienced homelessness, and all 3 are now in stable housing. And basically, I just asked them to share a little bit of their own experiences and how they would change up Oregon's approach to youth homelessness if they could.
So my name is Jessica Tucker. I am 23 years old, and I'm a mental health peer support specialist. One thing that I would love the general public to understand about youth homelessness, it's so much more common than you would think. So a lot of people will complain and have issues with the homeless community, like people in the parks. But what they fail to see is all of the kids and young adults that are in there as well. I had a mother who was struggling with addiction and her mental health. So from age 12 to 17, I was couch hopping, and I was also staying in a youth shelter, which is where I work at now, actually. I struggled a lot trying to stay in school and trying to just focus on myself because I always had to kind of babysit my mom and make sure she didn't overdose. There's got to be something done to have more help for people that are struggling with addiction and more resources for the child that is having to deal with their parents' addiction and the aftermath of all of that.
My name is Austin Four. I am 16 years old, and I am living it currently in Eugene, Oregon. I've spent 4 years of my life, total time, being homeless. It's not an easy thing to live on the street, especially when you're a kid, especially when you have all this stigma around you. There's not only physical problems, there's normally psychological ones that are much worse.
Having people who just see you as a human being and hold you and hold space for you and make sure that you are doing okay, it's so important. My name is Brant Mina. I also go by the name Dioawaroi, which means son from the river. I am 26 years old. The most powerful thing I learned when I was unhoused was the power of who you know, but also your ability to communicate really clearly who you are and what you need. That's really hard when all you've ever known is instability. That's really hard when nobody's ever trained you how to do that.
An idea to kind of help the transition between being a minor and then being an adult is having a rent-well class in high schools, because it helps with teaching young adults how to get housing and how to build credit, how to know all of the steps it takes to get into housing. So it would be a big help because there's many youth that don't have parents or people to guide them with those things, and it's a big contributor to youth homelessness.
The number one thing that I wish people would understand about being homeless, like how mentally draining it is, how scary it is to not know your future. You don't know if you're going to be uncomfortable when you sleep. You don't know if you're going to have food. You don't know if you're going to have water. You don't know if you're going to have anything.
The reality of it is the system that exists is not accessible to everyone. I was homeless for 3 months and out of it, right, in 3 months, because I have a good head on my shoulders and a college education. And that's not equal at all, right? Like, those opportunities are not equitable for people to access.
I would like the general public to understand that there's a strong need for there to be a change to start preventing and aiding youth homelessness so it's not as common.
And that change needs to happen now. It's going to take the community as a whole to work together, to bond everyone together, get them working, and fix this problem.
Hang in there. Hang in there. Hang on to your hope. You are going to need it. And if you got some stability, you're going to need to extend your hand to your neighbor. So hang on.
Tiffany, thank you so much for sharing their voices and for your reporting on this.
It's my pleasure, Jen.
Tiffany Camhi is a reporter for OPB. You can see all of her reporting on young people experiencing homelessness on our website, opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a new weekly podcast from OPB. Join us next week to hear from a video store clerk, a bridge operator, and a Powell's bookseller in our At Work With series. If you're here listening right now, you are part of our brand new podcast family. Help us grow by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app, including YouTube. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. He also engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing, and Tiffany Camhi did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. If you have a question for us, please reach out. Email theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.